Welcome back to another episode of Novelio. Today is Thursday, May 13th, 2021. I'm continuing on with my reading of Hot Winter Sun by Jessica Russell. Julian entered the house the next day after solitary ride and noticed that the Christmas decorations had been removed. Well, naturally they had. They had decorated early that year, as many believed that by the next Christmas any type of celebrating would be prohibited. Now, of course, there would be no celebration at all. Suddenly he heard running footsteps, which to his great surprise belonged to Catherine. She came to meet him in the hall, clearly hysterical over something. "Calm down, girl. In heaven's name, what's wrong?" She grasped at his coat and told him her father had come to take her away. "If you really claim you didn't mean those things you said to me when Robert died, if that's true, then save me from him. He's coming to take me back. Please help me, Julian, please. He will be uncontrollable after what I did at the graveyard. Nothing will stop him now. I told you he would come here." "Have done, Kathy. You're beside yourself." "You're not going with him," he said calmly. "Come." He took her hand and led her to the drawing room. "How you tremble in fear. Save your energy for fighting with me." He laughed then and immediately felt guilty. It was the first time he had laughed since Robert's death. "I should not make fun of you, for you're truly terrified, though there's no need." He called for Janet to bring wine. "Here, compose yourself. Janet is bringing you something to drink." The maid returned, and he handed the glass to Catherine. "Janet, tell this intruder I will give him 5 minutes, and in the meantime, summon the men in case he decides he does not have to obey my orders." "Yes, sir," she replied, and left the room. He turned to Catherine, who wore a look of utter despair. "Kathy, you're white as a ghost. Are you really that frightened, then?" He frowned as if he could not quite believe it. She looked up at him with an utter hopelessness that showed so vividly on her face it amazed him. How many times he had wanted to read her expression and could not, but this she was unable to hide. "Don't give me back to him," she whispered, speaking her worst fear. He walked over to her as if trying to unravel a mystery. "Kathy, what madness is this? Do you really believe I would turn you over to that man?" He offered her his hand at this, which she took and held tightly in both of hers and looked deeply into his eyes, as if trying to decide if he were really going to help her or if it were some great joke. Reading her mind, he said, "Nay, 'tis not some game. Your father has nothing to do with you and me. You think I'd let him have you as revenge for all our quarreling? It's nonsense. You're not going with him. I promise you. I meant what I said yesterday, and I mean what I say now." "Where shall I hide?" "You need hide nowhere. You stay here at my side." "But Julian, I do not think—" Her statement was left unfinished because Blake Trefellner had entered the room unannounced. Several male servants were immediately on his heels, but Julian raised his hand to stop them momentarily. "What business have you here, sir?" he asked Catherine's father. "I am come for my daughter, and I am going to leave with her. Her husband is dead, and I will now again be her guardian." "And is it your intention to provide a better life for her than she would have at Briarwood?" "I fail to see how that's possible. Catherine will stay here." "Begging your pardon, sir, but she is my daughter, and I am concerned for the welfare of her soul. I abhorred the fact that I could not prevent her marrying into this godless household, but it was done before I knew." "I will continue this as long as it amuses me," Julian said, still relaxed and almost lazy, and to Catherine's utter astonishment, still completely unafraid. "I'm curious to know why our household is judged godless by you. The comfort, the opulence, this room full of the trappings of wealth, of which the road to hell is paved. Tell the story. Look at my daughter. Her attire speaks of it as well. That is because I have been too lenient with her. If she had suffered a few more beatings through her life, she may not have turned out this way. I've been too soft. Most likely her soul is not one as can be saved, but I must try." "And how is that accomplished?" Julian asked with disdain. "I will thrash her within an inch of her life until she screams for mercy. Beauty such as hers does not come from heaven. There's something evil in it that must be purged. She must have a taste of hell on earth." "She has had that most of her life," Julian said. "How ridiculous. Beat the girl because she was blessed with beauty. You belong in a madhouse." Julian glanced over to Catherine, who looked as if she were about to faint at his feet. She did not move or speak, and her eyes never left her father's face. "Catherine," her father said, "come with me." At this, Julian rose and stretched his arm out to Catherine, and to his great surprise she flung herself against him. He instinctively closed his arms around her, wanting to do fierce battle with her father, but knowing how frightened she was, could not proceed. "Leave my property," he said quietly. "You're a disgrace to treat your own daughter this way while she grieves for her murdered husband. It will be a fatal mistake to return here, so take my words to heart if you value your well-being." At this he nodded to the men, and Blake suddenly found himself surrounded and quickly shuffled to the door. Julian addressed Janet then. "Please kindly go tell the men to escort Mr. Trefilner all the way home and explain to him along the way that he is not welcome at Briarwood." Janet nodded, trying to suppress a smile. She had worked many years in the Bradshaw household and knew the family did not look the other way at injustices. She was happy for Catherine, for even in the servants' quarters she was well liked. "You will burn, woman," her father shouted as the men removed him from the manor. Catherine covered her face with her hands and turned away as if to banish his image, but Julian pulled her back into his arms. She was too overwhelmed to resist him, and the feel of her, weak and defenseless, moved him inexpressibly. "It's finished, Kathy. He's gone. Don't upset yourself." "I just don't understand." "What is it?" he said, and took her hands from her face ever so gently. She looked into his eyes for the first time, not as a dueling rival, but as someone trying to communicate something. "How could I have been the child of him? I would give anything to be reborn." "Yes, but what of your mother? Robert told me how lovely a person she was. If you were born to another family, that would not be so." "Oh, please tell me I have inherited all from her and nothing from him." "There is none of him in you, Kathy," Julian said quietly. "Nothing whatever." Just then Richard walked into the room and told them that Blake was gone. When Catherine turned around, he stared at her for a long moment. "Catherine, are you quite all right? You look so pale." "Aye, Richard, I am, thank you." Even in these circumstances she wears proper etiquette, Julian thought. Such a quiet, graceful woman, except when I goad her into being otherwise. Later Julian expressed to Richard that he thought he'd been too lackadaisical concerning Blake, and asked his opinion about whether or not he believed Catherine's father was the murderer after all. "I want to blame him just to have an end to the matter," Richard replied. "But prosecuting and punishing the wrong person won't avenge Robert's murder, and it does seem that he was sighted in Plymouth that day." He sighed in frustration when Sarah entered the room with the tea cart, in which no one was interested. Julian asked where Catherine was. Sarah said she was in the winter parlour, and he went to find her there. He knew she was watching for her father, as the winter parlour gave a good view of the main entrance to the home. "Kathy, you must cease to fret about this now," Julian said, when he had found her there with Carinza. "I cannot do that until he is dead," she replied quietly. "Dead and buried. I wish he were dead and in hell now." She stared into the fire as if watching him leap into the flames of hell. "Catherine," Carinza said. "It's true," she replied flatly. "I wish it had been him instead of my beautiful mother. She was an angel sent from heaven, and he killed her." "But Catherine, you said she had a weak heart, and that's what her own mother died from. Is that not true?" "He helped her to the grave. She shot back, especially with a weak heart. No fires in the winter, no pleasure, no warmth or love or happiness. She couldn't withstand it. She'd have lived longer if not for him. If not for him, she would be here now." Julian studied her keenly, as if many pieces of a mysterious puzzle were falling into place, but for once he said nothing. He wanted her to speak more. He wanted any glimpse at all into her life, any detail, no matter how small. Carinza walked over to the fire and handed Catherine a posset she had made that she swore would help her rest. "Maybe you should—" "Has your heart ever stopped for fear, Carrie?" "Well, not exactly. No matter. He's gone now," Catherine said, and turned to stare again into the fire, and Julian knew she was watching something more than the flames. "Yes, he is, and—" Julian began. "He will be back. I am only fooling myself. He will come back again. He calls my beauty a sign of the devil. He accuses me of being a witch. I wish I was." "Catherine," Carinza gasped, "you shouldn't even say such things. These witch hunts have just finally died down after so long. To say things like that could place you in danger. What if someone heard?" Julian walked around to face her, inwardly aggravated at Carinza for prattling on about witch hunts, when all he wanted was to hear more from Catherine. "Why would you say that, Kathy?" Julian asked. "If I were a witch, I could not be recognized. I could turn into someone else. Witches do it. They do it all the time, don't they? They change forms, they become familiars or whatever they want to be at that moment to escape whatever menaces them. Suddenly she turned to Julie and Carinza, as if she was remembering there were other people in the room. She paused for a moment and looked at the glass in her hand, as if she had to concentrate to understand what it was. Then, without a word, she set it on the table and left the room. The next morning, Jennifer went to find her brother. "Catherine is leaving shortly," she said quietly. "If you want to say farewell." Catherine had already said goodbye to the rest of the family, promising to write, but thinking deep down that she probably never would. She cared for them all very much, but she had known them so short a time, and what was left to say? "This is where she showed me once that winter could be warm," Julian said to his sister, staring at the glass without really seeing it. "What could you be talking about?" asked Jennifer. "Well, she stood in front of the glass and she told me she could pretend it was summer here because of the way the sun heats the glass and makes warmth in the room. I never noticed it. Isn't that a remarkable thing, to have never noticed it until her?" "You've fallen in love with her, Julian," Jennifer said after a long silence, "and I can't think it has only happened since Robert's death." "No," he replied. "Lord forgive me. 'Twas long before that." When Catherine came into the room unexpectedly, Jennifer slipped out as quietly as possible. Julian, surprised to see her, said nothing and waited. She walked in and sat down in the window seat a few feet from where he was standing. "Julian, I wanted to say thank you for handling my father. Surely he won't come here again to bother you once he hears I am gone." "I was pleased to do it, Kathy, and I'm not worried about him returning," he said, amazed and happy that she had sought him out for this reason. "I would never have let him hurt you." "He didn't frighten you at all. You didn't actually even rise from your chair until the very end," she said. "How you remember every detail," he smiled, studying her for a moment. He realized she was truly mystified by his lack of fear, and it was a curious thing to him. "No, I didn't stand because I was not frightened, nor will I ever be of men such as he. They are cowards, these men who mistreat women and children, and I despise them." She looked at him for what seemed like a long time, but could not have been more than a few moments. "Well, thank you," she said in what he regarded as her stoic monotone. What emotion she must keep restrained inside her, he thought. "I think perhaps I seemed ungrateful afterwards, and in truth it is the opposite," she said, and then turned abruptly when the sound of the carriage was heard. "Kathy, if you ever need to come back, if you ever need anything, please know this will always be your home. And again, I'm sorry for all that's been wrong between us." "I am too," she said in what was almost a whisper. She stood there for a moment, almost as if fighting the urge to say something more. Some intense look he could not understand smoldered in her eyes for a few moments, and then was gone. She looked away, and then turning to him once again, her mask fully restored, said, "I owe you much, and I like not to leave debts unpaid." "You owe me nothing," he replied, his depression making him sound almost as stoic as she. "Lady Bradshaw, your carriage, ma'am," Rook said, walking into the room. "Please come back at any time, Catherine," Julian said again, as utter despair filled his soul. "Thank you, Julian, but I won't be back," she replied softly, and left the room with her usual silent grace. When she had gone, he sat down by the fire and did not move again until almost 2 hours had passed. He felt he would remember the sound of carriage wheels forever. "If only I had a little more time," she may have thought. Yes, I know she would have, and now it is too late.